A millionaire woman brings her black maid to a high society party intending to make her the object of ridicule. However, her maid's elegance and charm win over the guests, turning the joke back on her. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The late afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Veronica Mitchell's penthouse in downtown Chicago. The crystal chandeliers caught the light, casting prismatic patterns across the marble floors where three women lounged on Italian leather sofas, champagne flutes in hand. Veronica, dressed in a tailored Chanel suit, sat at the center of attention, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her glass as she watched her maid, Tasha, arrange white roses in a crystal vase. "Ladies, wait until you see what I have planned for tonight," Veronica said, her voice carrying the practiced smoothness of old money. Her friends, Barbara and Elizabeth, leaned in closer, their jewelry catching the light. "I've invited my help to attend the party." Barbara nearly choked on her champagne. "Your maid? At the Henderson Foundation cocktail party?" She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, though loud enough for Tasha to hear. "Whatever for?" Veronica's red lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Entertainment, darling. Can you imagine? She'll be like a fish out of water." Her gaze fixed on Tasha's back as the maid continued her work with the flowers, pretending not to hear. "I've even told her to dress up, as if she knows what that means." Elizabeth joined in with a tittering laugh. "Oh, this is delicious. Remember when Catherine brought her gardener to the Christmas gala? He tried to eat the caviar with a soup spoon." The women's laughter echoed through the room as they discussed their newest designer purchases and upcoming social events. Veronica detailed her newly acquired Hermes bag, while occasionally throwing pointed glances at Tasha, who moved methodically through her tasks, her face betraying no emotion. In the kitchen, away from the women's scrutiny, Tasha's hands trembled slightly as she prepared the afternoon tea service. She could still hear their mocking laughter, their casual cruelty wrapped in designer labels and social pretense. But instead of letting their words crush her spirit, she felt a quiet determination building in her chest. Later, in her modest room in the servants' quarters, Tasha stood before her small closet. Hidden behind her work uniforms hung a single red dress. She'd purchased it months ago from a consignment shop, attracted by its classic cut and vibrant color. Running her fingers along the silk-like fabric, she made her decision. If Veronica wanted to make her a spectacle, she would give them something to look at. As the evening approached, the penthouse transformed into a glittering showcase of wealth and status. Caterers moved efficiently through the space, setting up elegant displays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne towers. Veronica supervised every detail, occasionally shooting satisfied smirks in Tasha's direction as she imagined the humiliation to come. The first guests began arriving precisely at 8. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos escorted women dripping in diamonds and designer gowns. Veronica made her entrance down the grand staircase, a vision in midnight blue Valentino, commanding attention with every step. She moved through the crowd like a shark through water, accepting compliments and air kisses while keeping one eye on the service entrance, waiting for Tasha's arrival. Tasha slipped into the party quietly, taking her position near the bar where she would serve drinks. The red dress fit her perfectly, its color bold against her dark skin. She stood straight, her posture reflecting an inner dignity that even Veronica's planned humiliation couldn't touch. Several guests glanced her way, some with curiosity, others with a dismissive look reserved for servants above their station. Veronica watched from across the room, her anticipation building. The trap was set, the audience gathered. All that remained was to spring it at the perfect moment, when the maximum number of witnesses could observe her maid's social destruction. She raised her champagne glass in a mock toast toward Tasha, a gesture that went unnoticed by most, but carried all the weight of her malicious intent. Veronica clinked her crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon, drawing the attention of her gathered guests. Her smile was razor-sharp as she raised her voice to address the crowd. "Darlings, I hope you're enjoying the evening," she announced, her designer heels clicking against the marble as she moved to the center of the room. "I wanted to introduce someone special tonight. My maid, Tasha, has joined us." She gestured toward Tasha with an exaggerated flourish. I thought it would be educational for her to experience how the other half lives. Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. Several guests exchanged knowing looks, recognizing the calculated cruelty in Veronica's words. Tasha continued serving drinks, her movements steady and precise despite the attention now focused on her. Tell us, dear, Veronica continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Where did you find that interesting dress? The clearance rack at Target, perhaps? More laughter followed, though some guests shifted uncomfortably. Before Tasha could respond, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s stepped forward. Marcus Reynolds, one of Chicago's most respected art critics, approached the bar with purpose. His presence commanded immediate attention. His reviews could make or break galleries, and his opinion carried weight in both artistic and social circles. Actually, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the uncomfortable atmosphere, that shade of red is remarkably similar to the one Rothko used in his Orange and Red on Red. The way it catches the light is quite striking. He turned to Tasha, genuine interest in his eyes. Do you have an interest in art, young lady? The room fell silent. Veronica's smile froze on her face as she watched her carefully orchestrated humiliation begin to unravel. Tasha set down her serving tray and met Marcus's gaze directly. Yes, sir, I do. I spent many of my lunch breaks at the Art Institute, studying the modern wing. Rothko's work, in particular, spoke to me about the depth of human emotion that can be expressed through color alone. Marcus's eyebrows rose with pleasant surprise. You're familiar with Rothko's philosophy on color theory? And his belief that art should provoke basic human emotions, Tasha replied, her voice gaining confidence. I found myself particularly moved by how he used color to express what he called basic human emotions, tragedy, ecstasy, doom. Other guests began gravitating toward their conversation, drawn by Tasha's unexpected knowledge and poise. Marcus guided her to elaborate on her artistic interests, and soon she was sharing stories about growing up in Southside Chicago, where she discovered art as an escape from difficult circumstances. My mother cleaned offices downtown, Tasha explained, her voice clear and unwavering. Sometimes she'd take me with her when she couldn't afford a sitter. One of her buildings was next to the Art Institute. On free admission days, that became my sanctuary. The crowd listened captivated. Even those who had laughed at Veronica's earlier jokes found themselves drawn in by Tasha's authentic passion for art. Her knowledge wasn't superficial. She spoke about brush techniques, color theory, and artistic movements with genuine understanding. Veronica stood at the edges of the group, her knuckles white around her champagne glass. She watched as her carefully cultivated social circle gravitated toward her maid, hanging on every word. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to unfold. Her attempt at humiliation had somehow transformed into Tasha's moment of triumph. And now, Tasha continued, responding to another guest's question, I paint whenever I can find the time. It's mostly small pieces, but art has always been my way of processing the world around me. Fascinating, Marcus commented, his critical, I now studying Tasha with professional interest. You speak about art with more genuine understanding than many collectors I know who spend millions, but couldn't tell you the difference between expressionism and impressionism. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on the guests. Here was Veronica's maid, supposed to be a figure of ridicule, demonstrating more cultural sophistication than many of the wealthy attendees who purchased art solely as status symbols. The power dynamic in the room had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Veronica attempted to interject, to regain control of her party, but her words fell flat against the genuine engagement of her guests with Tasha's conversation. Her carefully planned social assassination had backfired spectacularly, and she could only watch as her maid emerged as the unexpected star of her own party. The conversation shifted to a quieter corner of the penthouse, where Marcus Reynolds had guided Tasha to continue their discussion about art. More guests gathered around them, creating an intimate circle that stood in stark contrast to the typical superficial party chatter. Tell me about your own work, Marcus said, his interest clearly professional now. What medium do you prefer? Tasha's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. I work primarily with mixed media, acrylics combined with found objects. Living on the South Side, I learned to see beauty in unexpected places. Sometimes I incorporate pieces of broken glass or discarded metal, transforming what others consider trash into elements of beauty. Veronica, hovering at the edge of the group, interjected with forced casualness. How quaint. Using garbage in art. Very ecological. Her attempt at sarcasm fell flat as Marcus turned to her with a raised eyebrow. Actually, he responded, some of the most innovative contemporary artists are working with reclaimed materials. It's a commentary on consumption and waste in our society. He turned back to Tasha. I'm curating an upcoming exhibition at the Chicago Contemporary Art Center focused on emerging artists who challenge traditional perspectives. I'd be very interested in seeing your work. Veronica's face flushed red. The Chicago Contemporary Art Center was one of the most prestigious venues in the city, a place where she had tried and failed to secure a position on the board of trustees. I have photos on my phone, Tasha said, pulling out a modest smartphone. She scrolled through images of her artwork, striking compositions that combined painted elements with carefully arranged found objects, each piece telling a story of urban life and resilience. The guests leaned in, genuinely impressed. A prominent gallery owner, who had been silently observing, spoke up. The way you've integrated those broken mirror fragments in that piece, it creates an incredible interplay of light and reflection. It's reminiscent of Anselm Kiefer's work, but with your own distinct voice. Tasha nodded. Kiefer's use of unconventional materials was actually a huge inspiration. But I wanted to bring that concept into an urban American context, exploring themes of race, class, and opportunity. More guests joined the discussion, asking increasingly sophisticated questions about her artistic process and influences. The atmosphere had completely transformed from Veronica's intended mockery to a serious artistic dialogue. This is absurd, Veronica suddenly burst out, unable to contain herself any longer. She's a maid. She cleans my house. This isn't some sort of artistic salon. The room fell silent. Then Charles Wellington of Venture, capitalist known for his brutal honesty, spoke up. Veronica, darling, the only absurd thing here is your behavior. While you've been busy planning this childish attempt at humiliation, you failed to notice the genuine talent right under your nose. Several guests murmured in agreement. Veronica watched in horror as her carefully cultivated social circle turned against her, drawn to Tasha's authentic passion and talent. Art isn't about who you are or where you come from, Marcus added firmly. It's about what you see and how you express it. And frankly, Tasha's work shows more originality and depth than half the collections I've reviewed this year. The conversation resumed, with guests now openly ignoring Veronica's attempts to interject. They discussed the upcoming exhibition, with several influential figures offering suggestions and connections. Tasha remained composed, engaging thoughtfully with each comment and question, while Veronica retreated further into the background of her own party. A successful real estate developer pulled out his business card. My office building downtown has a lobby gallery space. We showcase local artists, and I'd love to feature your work. The exposure could be significant. Another guest, an art professor from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, joined in. We also run an emerging artists program. Someone with your talent and perspective could really benefit from the resources we offer. As opportunities continued to materialize, Veronica watched her social power dynamic crumble. Her attempt to showcase class divisions had instead revealed the superficiality of her own world. The very people she'd counted on to support her mockery were now actively championing her maid's artistic aspirations. Tasha accepted each offer with grace, never once glancing triumphantly at Veronica or showing any sign of satisfaction at her employer's discomfort. Her focus remained entirely on the artistic discussion, her passion for the subject evident in every word. Veronica pushed through the crowd, wine glass trembling in her hand, determined to regain control of her evening. If we could all return to the main area, she announced, her voice strained with forced cheerfulness. The caterers are about to serve the main course, and I've arranged for some entertainment. But her words hung in the air, largely ignored. The crowd remained focused on Tasha, who had moved toward the grand piano in the corner at someone's request to explain the inspiration behind one of her pieces that incorporated musical themes. Taking advantage of the moment, Tasha straightened her red dress and addressed the group. "Actually, if you'll permit me, I'd like to share something." She moved to the small platform where a microphone stood, originally intended for Veronica's planned speeches throughout the evening. The room quieted. Even those who had been engaged in separate conversations turned their attention to her. Veronica stepped forward to object, but Charles Wellington placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Let her speak," he said firmly. Tasha's voice, clear and steady, filled the room. "When I first received the invitation to this party, I knew exactly what it was meant to be, a reminder of my place." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "But standing here tonight, I've been reminded of something far more important. Dignity isn't something that can be given or taken away by others." The guests listened intently, many nodding in agreement. Veronica's face grew increasingly pale. "In the 4 years I've worked in this penthouse," Tasha continued, "I've watched countless social gatherings where people competed to prove their worth through designer labels and social connections. But true worth isn't found in the price of your clothes or the size of your home." She gestured to her red dress. "This dress cost me $40 at a consignment shop. But it's not the dress that matters. It's the person wearing it. Just as it's not the expensive frame that makes a painting valuable, but the truth it expresses." Several guests applauded spontaneously. Others looked uncomfortably at their own designer outfits, suddenly aware of the superficiality Tasha was addressing. "I've spent years studying art not because I wanted to fit into this world, but because art speaks to something deeper than social status. It speaks to our shared humanity. When I look at a Rothko painting, I don't see the $1 million price tag. I see the raw emotion, the struggle, the triumph of human expression." Marcus Reynolds stood up. "This is exactly what the art world needs. Authentic voices that challenge our preconceptions. Not just about art, but about who gets to create it and define its value." The applause grew louder. Even some of Veronica's closest friends were openly showing their support for Tasha's words. Veronica made one last attempt to salvage her authority. "This is still my house," she declared, her voice shrill. "And you're still my employee." A heavy silence fell over the room. Tasha turned to face her employer directly. "Yes, I am your employee, Ms. Mitchell. I clean your home. I arrange your flowers. I serve your guests. And I do it all with pride because there is dignity in honest work. The same dignity I put into my art. The same dignity that everyone in this room deserves, regardless of their title or bank account." The impact was immediate and profound. Guests who had arrived expecting a typical evening of social posturing found themselves confronted with raw authenticity. The contrast between Veronica's attempted humiliation and Tasha's graceful response couldn't have been clearer. Several people approached Tasha with business cards and heartfelt handshakes. Others deliberately turned their backs on Veronica, a silent but clear statement about where their sympathies lay. The evening had transformed from a planned social execution into a powerful demonstration of character and integrity. Veronica stood alone by the champagne tower, watching as her carefully constructed social hierarchy crumbled around her. Her attempt to assert dominance had instead revealed the hollowness of her own position, while elevating the very person she'd intended to humiliate. As the evening progressed, the party naturally segregated into two distinct groups. The larger gathering surrounded Tasha near the floor-to-ceiling windows, while Veronica stood isolated near the bar, watching her social circle dissolve before her eyes. Even her closest friends, Barbara and Elizabeth, had drifted towards Tasha's orbit. "Tell us more about your current projects," urged a gallery owner, her business card already in Tasha's possession. "You mentioned a new collection?" Tasha adjusted her posture in the elegant armchair someone had insisted she take. "Yes, I'm working on a series called Invisible Threads. It explores the connections between different social classes in urban spaces, how we're all interconnected despite the artificial barriers we create." From her corner, Veronica tossed back another glass of champagne, watching as her guests, people she'd spent years cultivating relationships with, leaned forward, completely engrossed in her maid's artistic vision. The centerpiece, Tasha continued, is a large-scale mixed-media piece incorporating fragments of cleaning supplies, broken mirrors, and gold leaf. It represents the dichotomy between service work and luxury, how one enables the other. Fascinating, commented a museum curator who had remained quiet until now. Your perspective bridges worlds that rarely intersect in the art scene. When do you find time to create? I paint during my lunch breaks, Tasha replied. And every evening after work. My small apartment isn't ideal for large pieces, but I've converted half of my living room into a studio space. This revelation sparked immediate responses. Several guests exchanged glances, clearly moved by the image of Tasha pursuing her art in whatever spaces and moments she could find. That's unacceptable, declared Regina Foster, a prominent real estate developer. I have an empty studio space in my converted warehouse building. Artists can rent it at subsidized rates. You should come see it this week. Veronica attempted to approach the group again, her wine glass trembling slightly. Before she could speak, another guest shared a personal story about his grandmother who had worked as a housekeeper while pursuing her education at night. Others joined in, sharing similar tales of determination and perseverance in their families' histories. The atmosphere had transformed entirely. What began as an exclusive social gathering had become something more authentic, a space where genuine connections were forming, where vulnerability was welcome, where pretense had given way to real conversation. My new collection, Tasha explained, responding to another question, also incorporates elements from my daily work environment. She glanced briefly at Veronica's expensive art pieces. Working here, I'm surrounded by million-dollar paintings that rarely get more than a passing glance. It made me think about how we assign value to art and to people. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very setting that Veronica had intended to use for Tasha's humiliation was now providing material for meaningful artistic commentary. We often confuse price with value, Marcus Reynolds added, supporting Tasha's point. True art speaks to the human experience, regardless of its price tag or its creator's social status. Veronica watched as her carefully curated collection of contemporary art, pieces she bought based on their investment potential and social cachet, suddenly seemed hollow in comparison to Tasha's passionate descriptions of her work in progress. A young art student who had accompanied her mentor to the party raised her hand. Would you consider mentoring other aspiring artists from similar backgrounds? Before Tasha could respond, several voices chimed in with offers of support, studio space, materials, connections to art education programs. The conversation evolved into a broader discussion about accessibility in the art world and the importance of diverse voices. Meanwhile, Veronica's attempts to interject or redirect attention continued to fail. Her usual tactics, dropping names, mentioning exclusive events, highlighting her connections, fell flat against the authentic engagement happening across the room. She had become a spectator at her own party, watching as her carefully constructed social hierarchy crumbled in the face of genuine substance. The evening had developed its own momentum now, one that no amount of social maneuvering could redirect. What started as an attempt to reinforce class distinctions had instead sparked a conversation about breaking them down. The invisible threads that Tasha spoke about in her art were becoming visible in real time, weaving new connections among people who might never have truly seen each other before this night. The atmosphere in the penthouse reached a new intensity when James Chun, a renowned installation artist known for his collaborative works, stood up from his seat. The room quieted immediately. Chun rarely attended social events, and his presence at Veronica's party had been considered a significant coup. Until now, he had been observing silently from the periphery. Ms. Tasha, he said, his voice carrying across the room, I'm curating a collaborative exhibition at the Modern Wing next month. The theme is boundaries and barriers. After hearing about your work and your perspective, I believe your voice would be invaluable to the project. Veronica's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound barely registered as the crowd processed Chin's words. An invitation to collaborate with James Chun was the type of opportunity that emerged artists spent years pursuing. The exhibition, Chin continued, seemingly oblivious to Veronica's distress, will feature works that challenge social hierarchies and explore class dynamics in contemporary society. Your series on invisible threads would fit perfectly with our vision. Before Tasha could respond, Veronica stumbled forward, her composure finally cracking. This is absurd. She's a maid. She cleans toilets. You can't seriously. That's enough, Veronica, interrupted Charles Wellington, his tone sharp. Your behavior tonight has been embarrassing. While you've been trying to humiliate someone under your employ, you've only succeeded in revealing your own lack of character. Veronica, desperate to regain control, turned to her last resort. Let's play a little game, she announced, her voice tight with forced cheerfulness. A quiz about art history. Surely, if Tasha is such an expert, actually, Marcus Reynolds cut in, I think that's an excellent idea. Though perhaps not in the way you intended. He turned to address the room. Let's discuss the role of class and labor in art history. Tasha, would you share your thoughts on how the Renaissance masters depicted servants and workers in their paintings? Tasha rose to the challenge with grace. The representation of labor in art has always been fascinating. Take Velázquez's Las Meninas, for example. While it's ostensibly a portrait of the Spanish royal family, it's revolutionary in how it places the artist himself and the servants in the composition, challenging the traditional hierarchy of subject matter. The art historians in the room nodded appreciatively. Veronica's attempt to embarrass had once again backfired spectacularly. Furthermore, Tasha continued, warming to the subject. If we look at the works of Millet and the realist movement, we see a complete shift in how labor was portrayed. The Gleaners elevated manual workers to the status of worthy artistic subjects, challenging the notion that only the wealthy deserved to be immortalized in art. James Chin nodded approvingly. This is exactly the kind of perspective we need in contemporary art. Too often, we discuss class and labor from an external viewpoint. Your lived experience, combined with your artistic vision and historical knowledge, offers something genuinely new. Veronica made one final attempt to assert control. This is still my house, my party. A party, interrupted Regina Foster, where you invited someone with the explicit intention of humiliating them. Instead, you've given us all a masterclass in grace under pressure and the true meaning of artistic vision. The room buzzed with agreement. Several guests who had initially laughed at Veronica's early jabs were now actively avoiding her gaze, embarrassed by their earlier complicity. Chin pulled out his phone. I'd like to schedule a proper meeting to discuss the exhibition. My assistant can arrange everything. He paused, then added with a slight smile, unless, of course, Ms. Mitchell requires you to continue serving drinks. The pointed comment hung in the air. Every eye turned to Veronica, waiting to see how she would respond to this direct challenge to her authority. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that her response would define not just the evening, but likely her future social standing in Chicago's elite circles. The woman who had started the evening as the unquestioned queen of her social circle now stood alone, watching as her carefully constructed world realigned itself around the very person she had intended to destroy. The evening's momentum shifted again as the guests naturally migrated to the dining area, where the long table had been set for an elaborate dinner. In a striking reversal of the usual social order, Tasha was guided to the head of the table, the spot traditionally reserved for Veronica. The hostess found herself relegated to a far corner, where servers she had hired barely acknowledged her presence. Marcus Reynolds stood, wine glass in hand. Before we continue our evening, I'd like to propose something. He looked around the table, making eye contact with several influential figures in the room. We've all been moved by Tasha's talent and vision tonight. But talent needs resources to flourish. The room fell silent, anticipating his next words. Veronica gripped her napkin tightly, knuckles white with tension. I'm proposing we establish a fund, Marcus continued. Not charity, an investment in artistic excellence. Each of us here has the means to contribute to a grant that would allow Tasha to focus entirely on her art for the next year. Charles Wellington immediately pulled out his checkbook. I'll start with $50,000. He looked directly at Veronica as he wrote, a clear challenge in his eyes. Consider it seed money for genuine talent, rather than another donation to maintain social status. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Regina Foster matched the amount. James Chen pledged studio space and materials. A gallery owner offered a guaranteed solo show. Within minutes, over $200,000 had been committed, along with numerous professional opportunities and resources. Tasha sat quietly, her composure maintained despite the life-changing offers surrounding her. "I'm grateful," she said finally, her voice steady. "But I want to ensure this opportunity extends beyond just me. Could we structure this as a foundation for working artists? There are many others like me, creating art while balancing service jobs." Her suggestion drew enthusiastic approval. The very people who had arrived expecting to witness her humiliation were now actively participating in her vision for artistic inclusivity. "Brilliant idea," agreed a prominent philanthropist. "We could call it the Invisible Threads Foundation after your series. Focus on artists from service industry backgrounds." Veronica watched helplessly as her guests, people whose social approval she had spent years cultivating, reorganized themselves around Tasha's leadership. The sophisticated dinner she had planned as a backdrop for mockery had transformed into an impromptu fundraising event. A legal pad was passed around as guests made pledges and offered various forms of support. Some promised exhibition spaces, others offered consulting services or marketing expertise. The evening had evolved from a social gathering into something resembling a venture capital meeting, with Tasha's artistic vision as the centerpiece investment. "Of course," Charles Wellington added pointedly, "we'll need someone to handle the administrative aspects of the foundation." His gaze settled on Veronica, someone with experience in social organization and event planning. The implication was clear. Veronica could either adapt to the new reality or risk complete social isolation. Her carefully maintained position in Chicago's elite circles now hinged on her response to this situation. Tasha, demonstrating remarkable grace, spoke up. "Every perspective has value in building something meaningful. Even those who've traditionally held power can contribute to positive change." She looked at Veronica with neither triumph nor malice. "Sometimes we need to lose our footing to find a better path." The gathered guests murmured in appreciation of her diplomacy. Even in what could have been a moment of revenge, Tasha chose to extend an olive branch. Her response further highlighted the contrast between her character and Veronica's earlier behavior. As coffee and dessert were served, the conversation turned to practical matters: structuring the foundation, planning the first exhibition, developing outreach programs. Veronica's opulent penthouse, intended as a stage for social humiliation, had become the birthplace of an initiative that would challenge the very hierarchy she had sought to reinforce. The Power S. Hift was now complete and irreversible. The evening would be remembered not for Veronica's attempted cruelty, but for the unexpected emergence of a new force in Chicago's art scene, one that promised to bridge the very divisions her party had intended to emphasize. The evening had entered its final phase, and the transformation of the party was complete. In the grand living room, surrounded by Veronica's expensive but suddenly hollow-seeming art collection, Tasha stood to address the gathered guests. Her red dress, once intended to mark her as an outsider, now seemed to symbolize the passion and authenticity that had captured everyone's attention. "I want to thank you all," she began, her voice clear and confident. "Not just for your generous support, but for being willing to see beyond surface appearances. True art, like true character, reveals itself when we look past our preconceptions." Veronica made one final attempt to reassert herself, rising unsteadily from her corner seat. "I'd like to say something," she announced, her voice slightly slurred from too much champagne. The room tensed, preparing for another outburst. "As the hostess of this evening," she began, but her words trailed off as she noticed the collective wincing of her former friends. The title of hostess seemed to mock her now, given how thoroughly she had violated the basic principles of hospitality. Marcus Reynolds intervened smoothly. "Perhaps this would be a good moment for you to listen, Veronica. You've done enough speaking tonight." But Tasha, demonstrating the grace that had marked her behavior throughout the evening, raised her hand. "No, let her speak. Everyone deserves to be heard." The irony of her extending this courtesy to Veronica was lost on no one. Veronica stepped forward, swaying slightly. I wanted everyone to see. She struggled with the words, her carefully constructed social persona crumbling. I wanted to prove that money and status matter, that people like me are different from people like, but you've all turned against me. In my own home. No one has turned against you, Tasha responded calmly. They've simply chosen to see beyond the artificial barriers you try to maintain. Art has a way of doing that, showing us our common humanity. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Several guests nodded appreciatively at Tasha's diplomatic response. You were my maid, Veronica burst out, her composure finally shattering completely. You were supposed to know your place. Charles Wellington stood up, his expression stern. And what place would that be, Veronica? Below you? Less worthy? Tonight has shown us exactly who belongs where. Your maid, as you so insistently call her, has demonstrated more class, intelligence, and genuine artistic understanding than you've shown in all the years I've known you. The room fell silent. Veronica stood frozen, the full weight of her social downfall finally hitting her. Her expensive designer dress and perfectly coiffed hair suddenly seemed like cheap costume pieces in comparison to Tasha's simple dignity. Tasha moved toward her employer, stopping a few feet away. Status isn't something you can buy or inherit, she said softly. It's something you earn through your actions and character. I've learned that cleaning houses is honest work, just as creating art is honest work. The only dishonesty is in pretending some forms of work make us better than others. The gathered guests watched this exchange intently. The evening had transformed from a planned humiliation into something approaching a modern morality play, with Veronica's attempted cruelty serving as a catalyst for broader social change. The foundation we're establishing, Tasha continued, addressing both Veronica and the room at large, will be about breaking down these artificial barriers. Art shouldn't be confined to one social class or background. It's about expressing universal human experiences and emotions. Several guests dabbed at their eyes, moved by her words. The evening had transcended typical social gathering expectations, becoming something more meaningful, a moment of genuine social transformation. As the final glasses of champagne were poured, the contrast couldn't have been clearer. Veronica, isolated in her expensive dress and jewelry, surrounded by art she had bought but never truly appreciated, and Tasha, standing tall in her consignment shop dress, having won over the room not through wealth or status, but through authentic passion and dignity. As midnight approached, the party reached its crescendo. Champagne flowed freely as Marcus Reynolds called for attention one final time. He raised his glass in Tasha's direction, his gesture drawing all eyes in the room. To authentic talent, he proclaimed, and to the breaking down of artificial barriers. Tonight has shown us something remarkable, that true art, like truth itself, cannot be contained by social conventions. The guests raised their glasses, but before they could drink, Veronica suddenly lurched forward. Her face had taken on a desperate intensity, her carefully applied makeup now slightly smeared from dabbing at tears. You think you know everything, she said, her voice trembling. You think you understand what's happening here, but you don't know the whole story. She turned to face Tasha directly. Tell them who you really are. The room fell silent. Tasha's expression remained calm, though a slight tension appeared around her eyes. What are you talking about, Veronica? Charles Wellington demanded. Veronica's laugh was sharp and bitter. Our little artist here isn't just any maid. Go ahead, Tasha. Tell them your full name. Tell them about your family. As all eyes turned to Tasha, she straightened her shoulders in her red dress. My full name is Natasha Catherine Rothschild Pierce, she said quietly. And yes, those Rothschilds. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The Rothschild Pierce family was old money, even by Chicago standards. Their fortune had been made in banking and railroads during the city's early days. She's the lost heiress, Veronica spat out. The one who disappeared from the social scene 5 years ago, after that scandal with her father's investment firm. Poor little rich girl playing at being common. Rather than the shocking revelation Veronica had hoped for, her words were met with thoughtful silence. James Chun was the first to speak. "So you took a job as a maid after your family's scandal?" he asked Tasha. "Instead of using your connections to maintain your position?" Tasha nodded. "When my father's firm collapsed, taking the savings of hundreds of families with it, I couldn't bear to continue living in that world. I wanted to understand real work, real people, to create art that spoke truth, not just aesthetic pleasure for the wealthy." Marcus Reynolds stepped forward. "And you didn't use your family name or connections to advance your art?" "No," Tasha replied simply. "I wanted my work to stand on its own merit. The truth is, I'm more proud of what I've accomplished as a maid who paints than I ever was as an heiress who collected art." Veronica's attempt at exposure had backfired spectacularly. Instead of diminishing Tasha's achievement, the revelation only enhanced it. Here was someone who had voluntarily stepped down from privilege to understand life from a different perspective. The influential art critic from the Tribune, who had been quietly observing all evening, finally spoke up. "This is extraordinary. Not just the art, but the story behind it. A privileged heir choosing to experience life from the other side, creating art from genuine understanding rather than observation. This isn't just a story about talent. It's about authentic experience and moral choice." The International Gallery owner, who had offered Tasha an exhibition, nodded enthusiastically. "The Invisible T. Red Series. It's not just metaphorical, is it? You've lived both sides of the social divide." Veronica watched in mounting horror as her final weapon, the truth she had been holding in reserve, transformed into yet another triumph for Tasha. The very revelation that was supposed to expose Tasha as a fraud instead cemented her credibility as an artist who had chosen substance over status. More guests began sharing their own thoughts, but with a new layer of understanding. The promised support for the foundation doubled, then tripled, as the significance of Tasha's journey resonated with the assembled crowd. Her choice to work as a maid despite her background wasn't seen as a fall from grace, but as a conscious decision to seek authenticity in both life and art. In the final moments of the evening, as guests began gathering their coats and exchanging contact information with Tasha, Veronica stood alone by her floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the Chicago skyline. The revelation of Tasha's true identity had failed spectacularly, leaving her without any remaining weapons in her social arsenal. Then, unexpectedly, Tasha approached her former employer. "You knew all along," Tasha said quietly, standing beside Veronica at the window. "Yet you hired me anyway. Why?" Veronica's shoulders slumped, her carefully maintained posture finally failing. "Because I wanted to prove I had power over a Rothschild Pierce," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Even a fallen one. I thought having you serve my guests would be the ultimate triumph. And instead, you've destroyed everything I built. My social standing, my influence, No," Tasha interrupted gently. "I haven't destroyed anything. I've shown you a different way to build." The remaining guests watched this exchange with intense interest, sensing that the evening's true climax was unfolding before them. "I have a proposal," Tasha continued, turning to face Veronica directly. "The foundation we're creating needs someone who understands both worlds, the elite social circles and the working class. Someone who knows how to organize events, manage social connections, and navigate the upper echelons of Chicago society." Veronica's eyes widened as she understood the offer. "You want me to work with me?" "Yes. Not as superior and servant, but as equals. Partners in bridging the gap between worlds we both understand." The room held its breath. This was more than a job offer. It was an opportunity for redemption, a chance to transform humiliation into purpose. Marcus Reynolds stepped forward. "It's actually brilliant," he said. Veronica's social networking skills combined with Tasha's artistic vision and authenticity. The foundation could revolutionize Chicago's art scene. "But everyone here knows what I tried to do tonight," Veronica protested weakly. "How I treated you." "Yes," Tasha agreed. "And they'll also know how you chose to respond when offered a chance to change. Sometimes our worst moments can lead to our best transformations." Charles Wellington cleared his throat. "I must say, this is an unexpected but intriguing development. The story alone, former maid and former employer working together to democratize art. would attract significant attention and support. The remaining guests began to murmur in agreement. The narrative was compelling. Redemption, transformation, and the breaking down of social barriers, all in service of art and authentic expression. Veronica turned back to the window, tears flowing freely now. I don't deserve this chance. Maybe not, Tasha agreed. But art isn't about what we deserve. It's about what we create from the materials we're given. Even broken pieces can become part of something beautiful. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. It perfectly reflected Tasha's artistic practice of transforming discarded materials into meaningful art. The first exhibition, Tasha continued, could be called Reflections, exploring how we see ourselves and others through the lens of social class and status. Your perspective would be as valuable as mine. Finally, Veronica turned from the window. The hardness in her face had softened, replaced by something that looked like hope. You're offering me a way forward? I'm offering you a chance to be part of something real, Tasha replied. No more artificial hierarchies. No more social games. Just authentic expression and genuine connection. As the last guests prepared to leave, they witnessed something remarkable. Veronica Mitchell, the woman who had planned an evening of cruel humiliation, and Tasha Rothschild Pierce, the maid who had transformed that cruelty into triumph, standing together at the window, beginning to plan a future neither of them could have imagined when the evening began. The party ended not with the social destruction Veronica had planned, nor with the complete rejection she had come to fear, but with something far more powerful, the possibility of transformation. As the elevator doors closed on the last departing guests, they carried with them not just the story of an attempted humiliation turned triumph, but of how authentic art and genuine humanity could bridge even the widest social divides. In the end, the invisible threads that Tasha spoke of in her art had woven something unexpected, a connection between two women who represented opposite ends of a social spectrum, now united in a purpose that transcended their former roles of employer and maid.